Jesus and Mary Magdalene were not always in a crowd. There were moments, quiet, private moments, where the teaching changed completely, where the voice dropped lower, where the words became fewer but carried more weight, where Jesus stopped speaking to everyone and started speaking to one. And in those moments, what he shared wasn't parable. It wasn't metaphor. It wasn't the kind of teaching you could misunderstand and still be fine. It was a system. A precise, living, intelligent system for how to communicate directly with the source of all things. The monad, the undivided one, the singular intelligence that sits behind every single thing that has ever existed or ever will exist. And Mary Magdalene received it. Not partially, not in fragments, fully. Now here's the part that I want you to sit with before we go any further. Most people, and I mean the vast majority of people who consider themselves spiritually aware, who meditate, who pray, who set intentions, who do the work, most of them are still asking wrong. Not because they are not sincere, not because they lack devotion or depth, but because nobody ever handed them the actual system. They were handed a version of it, a simplified, often distorted, surface-level echo of something that was once whole. You have been talking to the source. I believe that. You have been reaching. You have been asking. But there is a very real possibility, and I say this not to discourage you. I say this because I believe it changes everything. There is a real possibility that you have been speaking in a language the monad does not recognize. And that is not your fault. That knowledge was taken from the room. Deliberately, carefully, over centuries. But it left traces. It always does. Truth has a way of surviving even the most aggressive erasure. And those traces, when you learn how to read them, point back to one of the most extraordinary private teachings in human spiritual history. What Jesus taught Mary Magdalene about asking and receiving from the monad. That is what this entire video is about. And I need you to stay with me all the way through. Because this is not something you can absorb in fragments. This is a whole teaching. And like every whole teaching, it only makes complete sense when you receive it completely. So stay. Because what comes next is going to rearrange something inside you. I promise you that. Let me tell you something about Mary Magdalene that most people never get told. She was not a footnote. She was not a background character. She was not simply a woman who followed Jesus from town to town out of devotion or gratitude. That version of her, the passive, peripheral version, was constructed. It was a portrait painted over a much older, much more powerful original. In the earliest layers of Gnostic understanding, Gnosticism being the current of early spiritual Christianity that prioritized direct inner knowledge over outer religious authority, Mary Magdalene holds a title that should stop you cold. She is called the one who understood the all. Not one of the ones. Not among those who understood. The one. Singular. The disciple who grasped the totality of what Jesus was pointing at when everyone else was still working through the surface layer. Now think about what that means for a moment. Jesus had 12 named disciples. He spoke to thousands. He moved through entire regions sharing his teaching. And yet, across the earliest spiritual texts that predate much of what eventually became official doctrine, one figure stands apart from the rest in terms of depth of reception. Not Peter, not John, not any of the 12. Mary Magdalene. And I want to be clear about why I think this matters, not just historically, but for you personally right now watching this. Because the question of who received the deepest teaching is actually the question of what the deepest teaching was. If you can understand why she was capable of receiving it, you start to understand what the teaching itself required of the receiver. And that tells you something enormous about what it's going to require of you. So who is she really? In the esoteric tradition, there is always a distinction between two kinds of teaching. The first kind is exoteric, outward, public, accessible to everyone, wrapped in story and symbol, so that each person can take from it whatever their current level of understanding allows. The parables Jesus told to the crowds were this kind of teaching. Beautiful, layered, intentionally open-ended. A farmer and his seeds could mean something different to a child, a merchant, a philosopher, a mystic. That was intentional. The second kind of teaching is esoteric, inward, private, transmitted only to those who have developed the interior capacity to hold it without distorting it. This teaching does not use symbol as a protective wrapper. It speaks directly. It names the thing itself, and it can only be given to someone who will not collapse under the weight of directness. Mary Magdalene was an esoteric receiver. This is not a small thing. In virtually every serious mystical tradition across human history, and I mean across all of them, from the Sufi orders to the Vedic lineages to the Pythagorean schools of ancient Greece. The esoteric transmission was always the rarest, most carefully guarded, most consequential part of the entire system. Teachers spent years, sometimes decades, preparing a student to receive it, not because the knowledge itself was too dangerous for ordinary minds, but because receiving it without preparation meant you would misunderstand it. And a misunderstood esoteric teaching is worse than no teaching at all. It sends you in exactly the wrong direction with tremendous confidence. Mary Magdalene did not need decades of preparation. This, I believe, is the key to her. She arrived already capable, already interior enough, already still enough at her center that when the deepest truth was spoken directly to her, she could hold it without flinching and without distorting it. There's a quality that every genuine esoteric tradition has a name for. In Greek, it is called apatheia, not apathy in the modern sense, but a profound inner stillness, a freedom from the reactive turbulence of ordinary emotional life. Not the absence of feeling, but the mastery of the inner environment. The ability to receive something enormous without your own inner noise immediately reinterpreting it through the filter of your fears, your wants, your history. Mary Magdalene had this, and Jesus, who was above everything else an extraordinarily precise teacher, recognized it. You do not give the deepest key to someone who will fumble it. You give it to someone whose hands are already steady. Now here is where I want to share my own view, and I hold this with real conviction. I believe the deliberate obscuring of Mary Magdalene's actual role was one of the most consequential erasures in spiritual history. Not because of politics, though politics was absolutely involved. Not because of gender, though that too was a factor, but because what was erased along with her central role was the type of teaching she represented. When you erase the foremost esoteric receiver, you effectively erase the esoteric transmission itself from the public record. You are left with the exoteric shell, the parables, the moral instructions, the outer forms, without the interior system that made the whole thing actually work. And that is exactly what happened. The ask and receive system Jesus taught, the direct monad communication, the pneumatic technique, all of it was attached, in the early transmission lineage, to Mary Magdalene's understanding. When her role was diminished, that knowledge had nowhere to live in the official story. It got pushed underground. It survived in fragments, in coded texts, in mystery schools, in individual teachers who passed it mouth to ear across generations. But it survived. And we are here today, you and I, because enough of it survived for us to reconstruct what it actually was. What it actually asked of the person who wanted to use it, and why it worked in a way that no surface-level asking ever can. But before we get into the actual system, and we're going to go deep into that, I promise you, we need to spend a moment with the monad itself. Because if you do not understand what you are asking to, you cannot understand why the method of asking matters so much. This is not optional knowledge. This is the foundation everything else stands on. Close your eyes for a second. Actually do it if you can. Imagine pulling back, not just from the room you're in, from the city, from the country, from the planet, from the solar system, from the galaxy. Keep going, past every galaxy cluster, past every structure of matter, past space itself, past time itself. Now what's left? Not nothing. Something that has no edges. Something that does not move because there is nowhere to move to. Something that does not think in the way you think, but from which all thought emerges. Something that is not conscious the way you are conscious, but from which all consciousness pours like light through a prism. That is the monad. The word itself comes from the Greek monas, meaning unit, single, alone. It was used by Pythagoras, the ancient Greek mathematician and mystic philosopher who founded an entire spiritual school around the hidden nature of numbers and reality, to describe the first principle, the one from which all numbers, all things, all existence emerges. Not a god sitting on a throne, not a personality that can be pleased or angered, not a being you can negotiate with. The monad is the ground of being itself. Now here is where it gets important. Here is where this stops being philosophy and becomes something urgent and personal. The monad is not separate from you. This is the piece that most religious frameworks obscure, and I think obscure deliberately, because the moment a person genuinely grasps that the source is not out there, but in here, running through the very core of their existence, the entire architecture of outer religious authority loses its grip. You no longer need an intermediary. You no longer need someone else's permission. You have direct access. But, and this is the part that trips almost everyone, direct access does not mean casual access. It does not mean you can wander in with your shopping list and expect results. The monad operates by precise principles. It responds to specific conditions. And when those conditions are not met, the connection is not made. Not because the monad is withholding, but because you have not yet met it on its own terms. Think of it this way. Radio waves are passing through the room you're sitting in right now. Thousands of frequencies. Music, voices, signals of every kind. They are there. They are real. But you cannot hear any of them with your bare ears. You need a receiver. And that receiver needs to be tuned, precisely, specifically, to the frequency you want to receive. 1 degree off and you get static. Not because the signal stopped, because the tuning is wrong. The monad is broadcasting constantly. It has never stopped. It will never stop. The ask and receive system is not about convincing the monad to transmit. It is about learning to tune yourself, precisely, specifically, to the frequency at which the monad recognizes itself. And that phrase, recognizes itself, is the most important phrase in this entire video. The monad does not respond to requests from what it perceives as outside itself. Not because it is indifferent to you, but because from the monad's perspective, there is no outside. There is only itself. When you ask from a place of separation, from a place of, I am here and God is there and I am reaching across the gap, the monad does not register that ask. Not as cruelty, as simple physics. You are broadcasting on the wrong frequency. But when you ask from a place of recognition, from the place inside you that I ask the monad, looking out through human eyes, the ask doesn't even need to travel, because the asker and the answerer are already the same. This is what Jesus was pointing at when he said things that confused his audiences. When he said the kingdom is within you. When he said he and the Father are one. These were not theological claims designed to set him apart from ordinary humans. They were technical instructions. They were him saying, this is the position you must occupy before the ask. This is the state you must enter. This is what it feels like from the inside when you are asking correctly. Now here is something I want to offer you as my own genuine conviction, not as information, but as something I have turned over in my mind many times. I believe most people experience moments of this, moments where they are suddenly, inexplicably, completely at peace, where the wanting drops away, where there is just a strange, full silence. And then, sometimes hours later, sometimes days, something they needed appears. Not something they begged for, something they rested into. I believe those moments are not accidents. I believe those are the moments when a person accidentally stumbles into the correct tuning, into the frequency the monad recognizes, and the system responds, because the system always responds, without fail, without exception. Jesus didn't stumble into it. He taught it, precisely and deliberately, and Mary Magdalene was the one who received the full instruction. So now, let's go into the system itself. This is the heart of everything. Everything before this was building the foundation, so this could land properly. And I need you to feel each piece of what I'm about to share, not just understand it with your mind, but feel it with something deeper. Because this system operates below the level of intellect. The intellect can point you toward it, but the intellect cannot execute it. Only you, the deeper you, the one reading this from somewhere beneath your thoughts, can actually do this. There are 4 keys. 4 precise, interconnected keys that together form the complete ask and receive system. Remove any one of them, and the system loses its power. They work as a whole. They were taught as a whole. And they need to be received as a whole. And before we go into each one, I want to say something important about the nature of this system itself. Because most people, when they hear system, immediately translate that into steps. A checklist. A sequence of actions they can perform in the right order, and then expect a result. That is not what this is. This is not a recipe. This is not a protocol. This is a way of being. The 4 keys are not things you do one after another. They are dimensions of a single interior state. They happen together, or they don't fully happen at all. By the time you have understood all 4, you will realize they are actually describing one thing, one complete, whole, living interior condition, from 4 different angles. Like 4 people standing around a sculpture, each describing what they see. They appear to be describing different things. But there is only one sculpture. Keep that in mind as we go through each one. The first key, asking from identity, not from lack. Here is the most fundamental mistake every single human being on earth makes when they ask for something from the source. They ask as a human. Now I know that sounds strange. Of course you ask as a human. What else would you ask as? But stay with me. Because the distinction I'm about to draw is the distinction that changes everything. When most people ask, whether in prayer, whether in meditation, whether in manifestation practice, whether in any form of spiritual petition, they ask from the position of someone who does not yet have what they need. They ask from the feeling of absence, from the ache of the gap. I don't have this yet, and I need it. The emotional signature of the ask is one of lack, of incompleteness, of being less than whole. And here is the thing that nobody in mainstream spiritual teaching tells you clearly enough. The monad does not recognize lack. It cannot compute it, not because the monad is heartless. There is no cruelty in the monad, only pure undivided being, but because the monad's nature is absolute fullness. The pleroma, the totality. In the monad, there is no gap. There is no absence. There is no not yet. There is only the eternal, complete, overflowing fullness of everything that is. When you approach that fullness broadcasting the frequency of lack, it is like holding up a sign written in a language the monad has never encountered. Not a language it refuses to learn. A language that is structurally impossible for it to register. Lack is a concept that only exists in the experience of separation. And the monad has never been separated from anything. Ever. So the signal you send when you ask from lack, that deeply human, deeply painful signal of, I am incomplete and I need this to be whole. It travels toward the monad and it dissolves. Not rejected. Unreadable. This is why Jesus' first instruction to Mary Magdalene, as understood through the earliest esoteric layers of the teaching, was about identity. Not about what to ask for, not about how to phrase the ask, about who you are when you ask, what position you are asking from, what self is doing the asking. And his answer to that question is one that most people, even today, are not fully ready to receive. You are not a human asking God for help. You are a fragment of the divine asking the divine to recognize what is already there. You are a spark of the monad, temporarily housed in a body, temporarily experiencing the sensation of separation, but never actually separate. Not for a single moment. The separation you feel is experiential, not ontological. It is something you are going through, not something you fundamentally are. And when you ask from the truth of what you fundamentally are, rather than from the experience you are temporarily having, the entire nature of the ask transforms. Think of it this way. Imagine a wave in the ocean that somehow became convinced it was separate from the water, that the wave was one thing and the ocean was another. And from that conviction, it began to ask the ocean for wetness, for depth, for the ability to move. All the things it already has, all the things it already is, it is asking for them as though they are somewhere else, held by something other than itself. From the outside, you can see the absurdity immediately. The wave does not need to ask for what it already is. But from inside the wave's experience, from inside the convinced of separation state, the asking feels completely necessary, completely urgent, because the experience of lack is real even when the reality of lack is not. This is the human condition, and this is the first thing Jesus addressed. When Jesus said, I and the Father are one, he was not making an exclusive claim. He was not saying, I am special and you are not. He was demonstrating the position. He was saying, this is where you ask from. This oneness. This non-separation. This identity. Not my identity specifically. The identity that is available to every being that has ever drawn breath in a human body, because every such being is, at their deepest core, a point of the monad's own self-awareness. Mary Magdalene understood this at a level the other disciples struggled with. Not because she was more intelligent, not because she was spiritually superior in some hierarchical sense, but because she had a quality of interior silence deep enough that the teaching could land in her without immediately being filtered through the noise of self-doubt, self-concept, and the thousand ways the ordinary mind resists the truth of its own divinity. Because here is the thing. The mind resists this. The conditioned human mind, shaped by lifetimes of being told you are small, separate, in need of redemption, insufficient. That mind hears you are of the same nature as the source, and it flinches. It argues. It produces all the evidence of your smallness and your failures and your limitations as counter-arguments. And that resistance is the exact thing that keeps the identity shift from happening. The first key asks you to do something remarkably difficult in its simplicity. To set down the argument. To stop producing evidence for your smallness. Not to deny the experiences you have had that made you feel small, but to recognize that none of those experiences actually touched what you are at the deepest level. Not one of them reached your actual nature. They were weather on the surface of an ocean that goes down forever. And when you can, even briefly, even imperfectly, even with one hand still holding on to the old story, step into the identity of, I am of the same nature as what I am asking, the ask changes completely. It is no longer a petition. It is no longer a request from below to something above. It becomes a recognition, an acknowledgement of what is already true. This already exists. I am already connected to the fullness in which this already exists. My asking is not a reaching towards something far. It is a remembering of something near. That is the first key. And I want to be absolutely clear about what it is not. It is not affirmation work. This is not repeating, I am divine, I am one with Source, until you believe it. Affirmations work on the level of the mind. And while the mind is a useful instrument, it is not the organ through which the monad is accessed. The first key operates below words, below the mind. It is a settling, a dropping down, a coming home to something you forgot you already were. It feels, when it genuinely happens, not like an achievement, like a relief, like something you were holding tightly has been released, like the effort of maintaining the story of separation has finally been allowed to rest. That relief, that exhale, that quiet settling, that is the first key engaged. The second key, the language of Numa, breath and spirit. Now we go deeper, because even if you manage to ask from identity, even if you settle into that non-separated place, there is still the question of how the ask is transmitted. And this is where the teaching becomes extraordinarily specific and extraordinarily practical. The ancient world had a concept that has been almost completely lost in modern spiritual practice. The Greeks called it Numa. The word means breath, but it means far more than the physical movement of air in and out of the lungs. In the earliest strata of Christian mystical understanding, the pneumatic tradition that predates the institutional codification of Christian doctrine, Numa was the living, intelligent, energetic medium through which divine communication travels. Not a metaphor, an actual medium. The way light travels through space, the way sound travels through air, the way electrical current travels through wire. Numa was the medium of divine transmission, and it was understood to permeate the human body, to be, in fact, the finer substance within the breath that connects your interior life to the interior of the cosmos itself. Valentinus, the 2nd century Gnostic theologian, and one of the most sophisticated spiritual minds of the ancient world, who taught in Rome and whose school attracted some of the most educated people of his era, described Numa as the living seed of the divine planted within the human being. Not a gift given at some point in history, a permanent, intrinsic, inalienable feature of what a human being actually is. The divine substance, housed in a material body capable, when properly activated, of communicating directly with the pleroma from which it came. This matters for asking because of what Jesus taught about the nature of words. Words alone are dead. This is not a controversial claim. Even in your own daily experience, you know this with complete certainty. You know the difference between words spoken with genuine presence and words spoken mechanically. You have heard someone say, "I love you," in a way that stopped time and filled your chest with something that felt like light. You have heard the same 3 words spoken in a way that felt hollow, flat, almost insulting in their emptiness. The words were identical, absolutely identical. What changed was the Numa behind them. In dead words, there is no Numa. The word travels through air and arrives at ears as sound. It can be processed by the mind. It can even be believed by the mind. But it does not penetrate below the level of mind. It does not reach the soul. It does not create resonance in the deep interior where real change happens. But in words, or in wordless intentions that carry Numa, that arise from the full interior depth of the one who speaks or who asks. The Numa travels with and through the ask. And Numa does not obey the same physics as sound or light. It does not diminish with distance. It does not require a physical medium. It communicates in a dimension that the ears cannot hear but that the soul, your soul, the soul of anyone in its radius, cannot miss. You have experienced this. You have been in a room with someone who was not speaking and felt something from them. A heaviness, a warmth, a presence that communicated something without a single word being exchanged. That was Numa. That was the interior state of a person radiating through the space between bodies. The Numa is always transmitting. The only question is what it is transmitting. Jesus taught Mary Magdalene that pneumatic asking is categorically different from verbal asking. Not better in the sense of more impressive. Different in kind. Structurally different. Operating by entirely different principles. Verbal asking uses the mind to form a request, and then the voice or the thought carries it outward. The chain looks like this. You have a conscious desire, you turn it into words or a mental image, you express it, out loud or silently, and then you send it into the void. And then you wait. Pneumatic asking works completely differently. Instead of the mind forming a request and sending it outward, the entire interior becomes the transmission itself. The breath, the body, the attention, the energetic field, the deepest seat of awareness. All of it. The chain looks like this. First, you recognize what is already true. Then your whole interior aligns with that truth. And then, you don't send the ask anywhere. You become the ask. The transmission doesn't happen through projection. It happens through resonance, through your whole being humming at the frequency of what is already real. Notice the difference in those two chains. In verbal asking, you are trying to send something away from yourself to something else. In pneumatic asking, you are aligning yourself so completely with what you are asking that the asking and the transmission are the same act. You don't send the ask. You become the ask. The whole of you, not just your words, not just your conscious intention, but your breath, the held tensions in your body, the quality of your attention, the background hum of your emotional state, the deepest seat of your awareness, all of it either aligns with and carries the signal of what you are asking, or it doesn't. And the monad receives what the whole of you is transmitting, not just the part of you that consciously formulated the request. This is why you can spend an hour in prayer and feel nothing. Because the conscious part of you was asking one thing while the unconscious Numa of your body, your anxiety, your unresolved patterns was broadcasting something completely different. The monad received the dominant signal. And the dominant signal was not the prayer. It was everything underneath the prayer. This is why Mary Magdalene's capacity for total interior alignment was so significant. She could bring all of herself, mind, breath, body, attention, deep awareness, into a single unified signal. Not through suppression of the other parts, through genuine interior integration, through having done enough inner work, whatever form that took in her specific life, that when she asked, the whole of her was asking the same thing. No contradictory signals. No split between the surface request and the deeper broadcast. That integration is what made her asking land differently. Now here is how you begin to recognize the difference in your own experience. And I want you to really sit with this, because this is where the teaching goes from concept to something you can actually feel. When you are asking in the verbal mode, which is where almost everyone operates almost all the time, there is a quality of effortfulness to it, a reaching, a sense of extending something from yourself towards something else. It feels like throwing. You form the ask and you project it outward, and then you release it and wait. And the waiting has a particular texture to it. It has anxiety woven through it. It has the quiet, persistent question of whether the throw was good enough, whether it reached far enough, whether it was caught, whether it mattered. That effortfulness, that reaching, that throwing quality, that is verbal asking, and you know it by its texture. The effort is the tell. When you are asking in the pneumatic mode, even partially, even imperfectly, even for 30 seconds, the quality is entirely different. There is no throwing. There is no reaching. There is a kind of settling into resonance. A hum. Something in you finds a note and holds it, and the ask happens in the holding of that note the way a tuning fork sounds when you bring it near another tuning fork of the same pitch. Not because you threw sound at it, because the proximity created resonance between two things of the same nature. That resonance is you making contact. That hum is the monad recognizing itself in you. And you will know it because there is no anxiety in it. There is no waiting with dread. There is a quality of arrival, of something having already happened, a settling into what already is rather than a reaching toward what might be. The breath is the bridge to this state, not because of any particular breathing technique, though breath work can help, but because the breath is the most immediate physical link to the Numa. When you breathe with full awareness, when you let the inhale be a genuine taking in, not just a mechanical oxygen exchange, but a real receiving of something, and when you let the exhale be a genuine release, not just a carbon dioxide disposal, but an actual letting go of everything that is not the ask, the body begins to align. The scattered Numa begins to gather. The interior noise begins to settle. And in that settling, the ask can finally arise from the right level, from below the mind, from the place where the breath meets the deep awareness that is always already there, from the place where your individual interior meets the interior of the cosmos. That is pneumatic asking. And once you have felt it, Even once, you will never confuse it with verbal asking again. The third key, asking without separation, collapsing the gap. Now we arrive at what I personally consider the most difficult and the most transformative of the 4 keys. Asking without separation. Everything about ordinary human experience is organized around the fact of separation. You are you. I am me. The chair you are sitting in is not you. The sky outside is not you. And whatever you call the divine, God, source, the monad, the universe, that is also not you. It is something else. Something other. Something you direct your asking toward the way you would direct a letter to an address that is not your own. This perception is so fundamental, so completely woven into every single moment of waking experience, that questioning it feels almost like questioning whether you exist at all. And yet, and this is the thing Jesus kept pressing his closest disciples toward, again and again, in different forms and from different angles, the separation is not ultimately real. Not in the way you experience it. Not at the level where the asking needs to happen. Let me explain what I mean without sliding into abstract philosophy, because this needs to be felt, not just understood. The kenoma, the Greek Gnostic term for the experience of emptiness, of being outside the pleroma, is not a place you are. It is a condition you are experiencing, like being cold. Being cold feels absolutely real. Your body responds to it as real. Your choices are shaped by it as real. But cold is not a substance. It is the experience of a reduced presence of heat. And when heat is restored, cold does not go somewhere. It simply stops being the condition. The kenoma, the experience of separation from the source, is exactly like that. It is the experience of reduced awareness of the monad's presence, not the actual absence of the monad. The monad cannot be absent from anything that exists, because the monad is the ground of all existence. Every atom of you, every breath, every moment of awareness you have ever had. The monad is the floor beneath all of it. It cannot leave. It has never left. But the awareness of it can dim. And when it dims enough, you experience yourself as cut off, as alone, as a small self navigating a vast, indifferent universe with no direct line to anything greater than yourself. That experience is real. I want to honor how real it feels, because I think a lot of spiritual teaching dismisses it too quickly, and that dismissal doesn't help anyone. What you feel when you feel separated is genuinely painful. It is not weakness. It is not spiritual failure. It is the human condition, as most people inherit it. But it is not the truth of what is actually happening at the level of reality beneath the experience. And Jesus' teaching on this was radical in a way that is genuinely hard to overstate. He was saying, the gap you feel between yourself and the Father is not a geographic fact. It is something you are actively maintaining. Every time you locate yourself as small, as spiritually insufficient, as someone who needs to earn their way back to the divine, you are investing energy in the story of separation. You are keeping the kenoma condition running. You are, without knowing it, choosing the cold over and over again. And here is the part that lands so differently once you really hear it. The gap does not close through effort, not through years of spiritual practice necessarily, not through suffering enough or being devoted enough or achieving some elevated state of consciousness. The gap closes the moment you stop actively maintaining it. That's it. The moment you withdraw your attention from the story of separation, the story of, I am here, and the source is somewhere else, and the distance between us is the problem I am trying to solve, and simply rest in the awareness that is already present beneath that story, the condition changes. Not because you did something extraordinary, because you stopped doing the one ordinary thing that was keeping the condition in place. Now, what does rest in the awareness beneath the story actually mean? Because I know that can sound like beautiful language that floats away the moment you try to apply it. Here is the most direct way I can point to it. Right now, as you watch this, there are thoughts moving through your mind. Reactions, associations, maybe agreement, maybe skepticism, maybe something in between. Those thoughts are there. You can feel them. But notice, something is also watching those thoughts. Something is aware of them. Something registers their presence without being pulled completely into any one of them. That thing, that awareness, that witnessing presence, is not a thought itself. You cannot find it by thinking harder. It is the thing doing the looking, not one of the things being looked at. That awareness is what I am pointing to. That quiet, spacious, witnessing presence that is behind all your experience right now. It was there when you were 5 years old. It was there in your darkest moment. It is there right now. It does not age. It does not accumulate wounds. It does not carry the story of your smallness because it is prior to all stories. That awareness is your contact point with the monad. Not your thoughts about the monad. Not your feelings about spirituality. That awareness itself, the pure, silent, witnessing presence, is the monad's own self-awareness operating through the aperture of your individual existence. And it is already, always, completely undivided from the source. The gap closes when you identify with that awareness rather than with the story of self that plays inside it. When you stop being the thoughts and remember you are the one watching the thoughts, even for a moment, even imperfectly, that moment of recognition, that is the gap closing. That is the Numa condition lifting. That is you stepping back into the pleroma, not as a future achievement, but as a present reality you simply stopped obscuring. And here is the thing that Mary Magdalene grasped. The thing that, honestly, makes something in me go very quiet when I really sit with it. When the gap closes, the ask is already answered. Now will be answered. Now will begin to be processed. Already is answered. In this moment, completely. Because from the position of non-separation, from the position of resting in the witnessing awareness that is undivided from the monad, you are standing in the pleroma. And in the pleroma, there is no unanswered question, no unfulfilled need, no gap between what is asked and what is given. Everything that exists or can exist is already present in its complete form, in the fullness of the monad. The asking from that position is not a request sent into an uncertain future. It is a recognition of what is already present in the fullness you have just stepped back into. This is what Jesus meant when he said, "Before you ask, it is given." Most people read that as comfort, a kind assurance from a loving teacher that things will work out. But it was a technical instruction. It was him describing the precise nature of plermatic reality to someone, Mary Magdalene, who had the interior development to act on that description. He was saying, before your verbal mind even forms the words of the ask, the answer already exists. Not somewhere in the future. In the dimension of fullness that you are always a part of, even when you forget it. Your job in asking is not to make the answer happen. It is to recognize the answer that already is. Recognize. Not create. Not summon. Not petition for. Recognize. This single shift, from petition to recognition, changes the entire interior posture of the ask. A petition comes from someone standing outside a door, hoping to be let in. A recognition comes from someone who has just remembered they were never outside, that they have always had a key, that the door was never actually locked. One broadcasts lack, the other broadcasts fullness, and the monad responds to fullness. Because fullness is what the monad is. Fullness is the only language it speaks. The fourth key, receiving as an act, not awaiting. The fourth key, the one nobody talks about clearly enough. The one where even people who have genuinely worked with the first three keys tend to lose the thread. Receiving. We have an almost completely passive relationship with receiving. We treat it as the end of the transaction. The ask is active, we do that. The receive is passive, that just happens to us or doesn't. We ask and then we wait. And in the waiting, the doubt creeps in. Time passes. The physical world, which has not yet shifted, starts speaking louder than the inner knowing. And the connection weakens. The frequency drops. Jesus was very specific with Mary Magdalene about this. Receiving is not passive. It is an active interior posture, a stance you hold, something that requires as much interior engagement as the asking, possibly more. Because the asking is a moment. The receiving is a sustained condition. Think of a musician who is truly inside the music, fully present, fully inhabited. They do not play a note and then wait to see if music happened. The playing and the music are one continuous act. The moment the musician is genuinely playing, music is already occurring. There is no delay between cause and effect because they are not separate events. They are one event. The ask and receive system works the same way. When the ask is genuinely made, from identity with Numa, from non-separation, the asking and the receiving are not two events with a waiting period between them. They are one event experienced from two angles. The moment the ask is real, the receive is real. What comes later in the physical world is not the answer arriving. It is the answer becoming visible in a dimension that moves more slowly than the plermatic dimension where the answer was already given. Your job after the ask is not to wait. Your job is to hold the frequency, to remain in the interior posture that made the ask real, to tend it the way you tend to fire, not frantically, not anxiously, but with steady, calm, consistent attention, returning to it when the noise of ordinary life pulls you away, not with frustration, with the simple practiced motion of return. The Gnostic word for this is pistis, usually translated as faith, but that translation loses almost everything. Pistis is not belief in the absence of evidence. Pistis is direct inner knowing held stable even when the outer world contradicts it. Not denial, not delusion. The practiced, steady prioritizing of what you know inwardly over what you see outwardly. Mary Magdalene embodied this completely. Her outer world was not peaceful or simple, and yet nothing in that outer world could move her from what she had directly touched in her interior. That steadiness was not a gift she was born with. It was cultivated through repeated return, through choosing the inner knowing over the outer noise, again and again, until the inner knowing became her dominant frequency. That cultivation is available to you, right now, in the life you are actually living. Each return strengthens the capacity. Each return makes the next one easier. Over time, and genuinely, this does not take as long as you fear. The pistis stabilizes. The knowing becomes steady. The channel becomes clear. And the ask and receive system begins operating with a consistency that will quietly, profoundly, permanently reshape your relationship with reality. Not because the monad changed, because you became a clearer vessel for what it was always already transmitting. These are the 4 keys. Identity, Numa, non-separation, active receiving. Together they form a complete system, a living circuit, from the one who asks to the monad that responds and back. Seamless, direct, precise, not a technique of the mind, a condition of the whole being, not something you do and then stop doing, something you grow into until it becomes, slowly, the most natural way you exist. And I want you to understand one more thing before we move on. One thing that I think is essential for this to land the way it deserves to. Jesus did not give this teaching to Mary Magdalene because she was exceptional. He gave it to her because she was ready, and readiness is not a fixed state. It is not something you are born with or are not born with. Readiness is something that grows, something that is happening in you right now, in the very fact that you are here, with this video, at this moment, turning these ideas over in whatever part of you receives them most deeply. You are not in this accidentally. The fact that this teaching has found you, in this form, at this time, is itself a kind of answer to questions you may have been carrying for a long time, to the persistent sense that there was something more to the asking than what you had been taught, to the quiet, stubborn knowing that the source was not as far as it seemed and not as complicated to reach as the outer systems made it appear. That knowing was right. It has always been right. And now you know what to do with it. But now I need to ask you something that might feel uncomfortable. If this system was real, if this was the actual heart of the teaching Jesus gave, why don't you know about it? Why wasn't this in every church, every Sunday school, every spiritual text handed to every seeker for 2,000 years? The answer to that question is one of the most important things I'm going to share with you today. There was a moment in history, a specific, datable, documentable moment, when a decision was made. Not by accident, not by the slow drift of cultural change, by deliberate human choice. The decision was to standardize the spiritual transmission, to consolidate it, to make it uniform, controllable, and mediated through a central authority. And everything that could not be standardized, everything that was too interior, too direct, too individual, too resistant to institutional management, had to go. The Pneumatic tradition was the first to go. Pneumatic Christianity, the strand that prioritized direct spirit contact, inner knowing, individual divine access, was declared heretical within a few centuries of Jesus' death. Not because it was false, not because it was dangerous to ordinary people, but because it was dangerous to institutional power. A person with direct, unmediated access to the monad does not need a priest, does not need a hierarchy, does not need a permission structure, and an institution built on being the necessary intermediary between humans and the divine cannot survive a population of people who have discovered they need no intermediary. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is documented history. Scholars like Elaine Pagels, professor of religion at Princeton University and one of the foremost researchers of early Christian diversity, spent decades showing the historical record of how specific strands of early Christian teaching were systematically excluded from what became official doctrine. The choices were not random. The excluded teachings consistently share a common feature. They locate authority inside the individual. They make the institutional layer unnecessary. And in 1945, something happened that should have shaken the spiritual world to its core. In the Egyptian desert near a town called Nag Hammadi, a farmer named Muhammad Ali al-Salman was digging near a cliff face and struck a sealed clay jar. Inside that jar were 13 leather-bound codices, papyrus texts, over 50 ancient documents. These were the texts that had been buried, deliberately hidden, almost certainly to protect them from destruction, sometime around the late 4th century, when the enforcement of official doctrine was at its most aggressive. Someone or a group of people who understood what was being lost took these texts and sealed them in the earth rather than let them burn. And what did those texts contain? The interior teachings, the direct access system, the pneumatic transmission. The monad explained not as theology, but as living reality. Mary Magdalene's role described in terms that the official tradition had entirely erased. The ask and receive dynamic articulated with a precision that the exoteric tradition never even approached. It had been sitting in the Egyptian desert for 1600 years, waiting. Now here is my honest personal opinion on this. And I share it because I think it matters. I believe what was suppressed was not just a set of teachings. What was suppressed was a relationship. The direct, interior, unmediated relationship between the individual human being and the source of all things. That relationship, when it is alive in a person, makes them ungovernable in the best possible sense. Not rebellious, not destructive, but simply unable to be made dependent, unable to be made small, unable to be convinced that their access to the divine requires someone else's approval. That is what was taken, and I believe that is exactly what we are here today to reclaim. Not as rebellion, as restoration, because the system was never destroyed. You cannot destroy a truth that is written into the structure of existence itself. You can only obscure it, bury it, force it underground, and it will wait, in a clay jar in an Egyptian desert for 16 centuries if necessary, because the truth has more patience than the institutions that try to suppress it. And now it is here, unburied, available, speaking through the fragments that survived and the understanding that has slowly, carefully, lovingly been reconstructed from those fragments. And the question now is not whether this system is real. The question is whether you are ready to use it. Here is something you need to understand about the way the monad answers. It does not send a letter. It does not speak in a voice you hear with your ears. It does not write a message in the sky. It does not perform a dramatic event that removes all doubt. None of the things the mind expects as evidence of an answer are how the monad actually communicates. The monad answers in resonance shifts. And if you don't know what to look for, you will miss them. You will miss them completely. You will sit there convinced that your ask was not received, when in fact the entire field around you has already begun to reorganize in response. And you won't notice, because you are looking for the letter when the monad sends light. Let me explain what a resonance shift actually feels like from the inside. The first sign, and this is the one I want you to remember above all others, is a sudden, unexpected quieting. Not a silence of the outer world, a silence in you, a dropping of the interior noise, a moment where the mental chatter that is almost constant in ordinary human awareness simply softens, recedes. And in that space, something feels slightly different. Not better, necessarily. Not euphoric. Just cleaner, clearer, like the air after rain. That is not a mood. That is the monad's frequency touching your interior. That is the resonance beginning to shift. The second sign is what I would call a loosening of urgency. Whatever you asked about, the need, the desire, the situation, it suddenly feels slightly less critical. Not because it no longer matters, but because something inside you has contacted a level of reality where the outcome is already settled. The anxiety, which was the emotional signal of your belief in lack and separation, softens. Because at the level from which you asked, there is no anxiety. There is only fullness. And that fullness, briefly, is touching your waking experience. The third sign, and this one tends to come a little later, sometimes hours, sometimes a day or two, is what I call the convergence. Things begin to arrange themselves with an ease and a synchronicity that the logical mind cannot fully account for. A conversation happens at exactly the right moment. Information arrives through an unexpected source. A door opens that was previously solidly closed. And the quality of these events is distinct. They do not feel forced. They feel inevitable, like they were always going to happen, and you have simply arrived at the moment when they become visible. This is the monad's answer becoming visible in physical reality. Now here is the concept that the Gnostic tradition held with tremendous reverence in relation to this process. The pleroma, the fullness, is the domain in which all of this is already complete. The pleroma is not a place. It is a dimension of reality. the dimension in which the monad operates. And in the pleroma, your ask and its answer exist simultaneously. There is no delay in the pleroma. There is no working toward. There is only the complete, whole, perfect expression of everything that is. What we experience as the manifestation process, the thing people try to control and manipulate through vision boards and affirmations and ritual, is not the creation of anything. It is the translation of something from the pleromadic dimension into the dimension of time and matter. And the translator is you. Your interior alignment, your frequency, your identity, your Numa, your degree of non-separation, determines the clarity and speed of that translation. Mary Magdalene understood this process at a depth that I find genuinely breathtaking when I sit with it. She understood that her role, after the ask, was not to wait passively or to push and force and manipulate. Her role was to remain as clear a translator as possible, to stay aligned, to keep the frequency steady, to not let the noise of the unshifted world pull her back into separation. And the texts that survived, in fragments, in references, in the writings of those who encountered the tradition she represented, consistently describe her as someone who modeled exactly this. A person of extraordinary interior steadiness, not emotionally flat, not detached from life, but anchored in something so deep and so real that the turbulence of the surface world could not move her from it. That steadiness is what made her the perfect receiver. And that same steadiness is what makes you, right now in your ordinary life, capable of being the same. You do not need to be a first-century mystic. You do not need to have been chosen by a teacher of Jesus's caliber. You do not need to undergo years of monastic discipline. You need to understand the system. You need to feel what the keys actually mean. You need to practice, imperfectly and humanly, the interior shifts they point toward. And you need to learn to recognize the monad's answers when they come. Because they're already coming. They have probably been coming for some time. And if you haven't been seeing them, it is only because no one told you what to look for. Now I want to bring this all the way home. To you, personally. Let me speak directly to you now. Not to seekers in general. Not to a spiritual audience in the abstract. To you, the specific person watching this with your specific life, your specific needs, your specific history of reaching towards something and not quite connecting with it the way you hoped. This system is for you. Not for mystics who have already achieved some elevated state. Not for people who were born with unusual spiritual gifts. Not for the devotionally perfect or the theologically trained. For you, exactly as you are, in the life you are actually living. Here is what I want you to understand before you ever attempt to use the ask and receive system. Before the first key is applied, before the Numa is engaged, before any of it, there is something you need to release. And this release is not a technique. It is a truth you have to let land. You need to release the belief that you are not qualified. This is the deepest block, deeper than lack of technique, deeper than lack of practice. The bone-deep belief, installed by centuries of religious authority and cultural conditioning, that direct access to the monad is for someone else. Someone holier, someone more spiritual, someone who has done more work, suffered more, been chosen more explicitly. That belief is a lie. I say that with full conviction. It is a constructed lie, deliberately installed to maintain the dependent structure I described earlier. The monad has no qualification criteria. The monad does not have a waiting list. The monad recognizes itself in every single spark of consciousness that has ever existed, including yours, especially yours. So release that first, before anything else. Now, walk with me through what it actually looks like to enter this system in your real life. You begin with stillness, not perfect stillness, not meditative mastery, just a genuine pause, a moment of actual stopping. You stop the doing. You stop the thinking about the problem. You stop the strategizing and the worrying and the running through scenarios. You just stop. Even 30 seconds of genuine stopping is enough to begin. In that stopping, you let the identity shift begin. You are not performing it. You are remembering it. You are remembering, in whatever way you can access, that you are not a small, isolated human begging at a closed door. You are a point of consciousness that is, at its deepest level, of the same nature as everything that exists. You don't have to feel this perfectly. You don't have to believe it all the way down. You just have to turn toward it, like turning your face toward the sun. The warmth comes whether you fully understand the physics of solar radiation or not. Then you breathe, deliberately, with awareness, not as a technique, as an act of Numa. You let the breath be the vehicle of your interior. You let the inhale bring you deeper into your own center. The exhale release everything that is not the ask. You breathe until something in you settles, until the urgency softens, until the asking feels less like throwing and more like resting. And then from that position, from that breath, from that identity, you ask. Not in a long, elaborate prayer. The monad does not respond to length or eloquence. You ask in the simplest, most honest possible form. What is the truest version of what you need? Strip away all the justifications, all the bargaining, all the, and here's why I deserve this. Just the ask. Clean. Direct. True. And then you collapse the gap. You let the asking be the moment of arrival, not the beginning of a waiting period. You feel, or reach for the feeling of, the fullness. The pleroma. The already given. You stand in the recognition that what you have asked for exists, complete and whole, in the dimension of fullness, and that your ask has been recognized because the one who asked is of the same nature as the one asked. And then you receive. Actively. You do not fold your arms and wait for the mailman. You hold the frequency. You stay in the interior posture. You let the stillness remain as long as it wants to. And when the noise of ordinary life returns, as it will, because you are human and life is loud, you return to the frequency as often as needed. Not as desperation, as tending, the way a gardener tends a seedling, with steadiness and trust and the complete absence of panic. Now here is something I want to say plainly, because I think it needs to be said. This is not a guarantee of getting everything you think you want. This is not a spiritual vending machine. The monad does not produce results according to your current conscious desire. It produces results according to the deepest truth of what you actually are and what actually serves your fullest expression. Sometimes what you ask for is exactly that. Sometimes what arrives is something adjacent, something better, or something that reveals why what you asked for wasn't actually the thing you needed. But something always responds. Always. When the conditions are genuinely met, when the identity is real, the Numa is alive, the gap is collapsed, the receiving is active, the monad always responds. I believe this with everything I have. I believe it not because I was told to believe it, but because I have watched it happen in my own life and in the lives of people around me. The response is real. The system is real. You just have to learn to ask in the right language. And now you know that language. We've come a long way together in this video. From Jesus and Mary Magdalene in a quiet private moment, through the nature of the monad and why how you ask matters as much as what you ask. Through the 4 keys, identity, Numa, non-separation, active receiving. Through the history of what was hidden and why. Through the signs of how the monad answers. Through your own walk into the system. And now I want to leave you with something that I think is more valuable than everything else combined. Not more information. A question. Because here is what I have come to believe, personally and deeply, about genuine spiritual transmission. The most powerful thing a teacher can give you is not an answer you carry. It is a question that lives in you. A question that continues to work on you, reshape you, open you, long after the teaching is over. Long after the video has ended, and the screen has gone dark, and you have moved on to the ordinary tasks of your day. Jesus left Mary Magdalene with this understanding. Not a conclusion, an opening. A living, active, productive question that she carried inside her, and that, by all accounts, continued to reveal its depths for the rest of her life. The question is this: who is the one asking? That's it. That is the question. Not what are you asking for? Not how should you ask? Not whether you deserve what you're asking for. But who is the one asking? What is the nature of the self that forms the ask? From what position, what identity, what depth of interior reality does the ask arise? Because here is the complete truth that this entire teaching has been pointing at. The answer you receive from the monad is always an exact match for the level from which the ask was made. Always. Without exception. When you ask from the surface, from habit, from panic, from the loud, frightened voice of the unexamined self, the answer arrives at the surface, if it arrives at all. Shallow call, shallow response. But when you ask from the deepest place in you, from the place where your individual awareness touches the universal awareness, where the spark recognizes the flame, where the fragment knows itself as the whole, the answer that arrives is from that same depth. And an answer from the depth of the monad changes things. Not just circumstances. You, the one who asked. This is why Mary Magdalene changed. This is why, in the earliest portraits of her that survived the Great Erasure, she is described not merely as devoted or faithful, but as transformed. As someone who had undergone a fundamental interior shift, that could not be explained by ordinary experience or ordinary devotion. She had been reached at the depth, because she had asked from the depth, because she had been taught how to find that depth and how to speak from it. And that teaching, that same teaching, is available to you. Not as a historical curiosity, not as a theological debate, as a living practice, as a real, applicable, today in your life system for how you communicate with the intelligence that runs through all of this. You are not too ordinary for this. You are not too broken for this. You are not too late for this. The system does not care about your past. The monad does not keep a record of how many times you asked from the wrong place. The moment you ask from the right place, truly, genuinely, even imperfectly, the connection is made. Instantly. Without delay. Without judgment. Because the monad is not judging you. It is waiting for you to stop judging yourself. It is waiting for you to stop believing the story of your smallness and step into the truth of what you actually are. A being of the same nature as the source. A spark that has never left the flame, no matter how far it seemed to travel. A point of awareness that carries within it, right now, in this moment, in the life you are actually living, the full capacity for direct, unmediated contact with the intelligence that holds all of this together. This is what Jesus saw in Mary Magdalene. This is what he taught her to see in herself. This is what the ask and receive system, at its deepest level, is actually about. Not getting things, not manifesting desires, not even spiritual attainment in the ordinary sense. Recognition. You recognizing what you are. The monad recognizing itself in you. That recognition is the ask. That recognition is the answer. They are the same event. And now you carry the question. Who is the one asking? Take it with you. Let it work on you. Let it open things inside you that haven't been opened yet. Ask it before you ask anything else. Ask it when you sit down to pray or meditate or set an intention. Ask it when you are in the middle of a crisis and you reach toward the source in desperation. Stop. Ask the question first. Who is asking? When you can answer that question, not with words, but with an interior recognition, then ask what you need to ask. And watch what happens. I believe in this system. I believe in its origin. I believe it was real when Jesus taught it, and I believe it is real now. And more than anything else, I believe it is yours. Not mine to give you. It was already yours. I have only pointed toward what was always already there. Now I have to be honest with you. YouTube has pulled monetization from this channel to pressure me into silence. They do not want this knowledge spreading. I will not comply. I won't water this down for advertisers, and I am not slowing down. I'm going deeper. But this fight takes resources, and I can't sustain this channel alone. If what you found here has opened your eyes, hit the link in the description and join me on Patreon right now. You'll get instant access to unfiltered, esoteric member-only videos, exclusive audio podcasts, and the suppressed blueprints they refuse to let me publish here. Most people will scroll right past this and go back to sleep. Don't let that be you.